Hi. So still not feeling 100%, but I do want to address some of the questions that I've gotten while I've been out of commission here. So I'll just do my best. Okay, so first question that we have here. Which one of the following, if true, most helps to explain the substantial genetic differences among the shrimp populations? So most helps explain. This would fall into like the paradox category. You might also call it resolve, reconcile, explain. So depending on what categorization system you're looking at, it might have a different name. But essentially, we're trying to add something that's going to make this make sense, right? So we've got substantial genetic differences, and that's something that would be unexpected, I guess. And I can see the word surprising here. So yeah, that's definitely also a good clue as to what we are trying to explain. Okay, so populations of a shrimp species at 11 different Indonesian coral reefs show substantial genetic differences from one reef to another. This is surprising because the area's strong ocean currents probably carry baby shrimp between the different reefs, which would allow the populations to interbreed and become genetically indistinguishable. So this the fact that there are substantial genetic differences goes against our expectation that they would interbreed and become genetically indistinguishable. So we want to find something that's going to explain why, despite this probability of the baby shrimp being carried between the different reefs and interbreeding, like even though that's probable, that they would be allowed to interbreed, why do they still have genetic differences? Why have they not become genetically indistinguishable? Okay, so A, the genetic differences between the shrimp populations are much less significant than those between shrimp and any other marine species. I mean, this is very likely true, right? So the differences between a category of animals, shrimp, is going to be smaller than the difference between that category and others, right? They're grouped together because they are similar. But they still do have substantial genetic differences between them. They are not genetically indistinguishable. So this really is irrelevant to our issue. It's not going to help explain why we have substantial genetic differences between the shrimp rather than them being genetically indistinguishable. The individual shrimp within a given population at any given Indonesian coral reef differ from one another genetically, even though there is widespread interbreeding within any such population. Again, this is speaking to a level of categorization that we're not dealing with, right? We want to know why these populations of shrimp species differ substantially from one another instead of being genetically indistinguishable. We want to look at the level of population within a species rather than comparing to different species, as with A, or going smaller than that, right, to like a smaller differences by looking at individual shrimps within populations. So B won't help either. All right. C, before breeding, shrimp of the species examined migrate back to the coral reef at which they were hatched. So this is really going to help, right? So yes, the baby shrimp get carried to different reefs, and that would allow them to interbreed, but they actually don't interbreed. when they go to a different reef from the one that they were hatched at. They go back to where they were hatched and they breed there. So that does keep this populations from interbreeding. So even though they could interbreed, they don't. They migrate back. So C looks really helpful. D, most shrimp hatched at a given Indonesian coral reef are no longer present at that coral reef upon becoming old enough to breed. This would exacerbate the issue, right? This makes it more likely that they would be genetically indistinguishable because they wouldn't stay where they were born. They would interbreed and they would travel to other reefs and then they would interbreed with each other. So this D is not going to help explain. It's going to make it seem less likely that they would have substantial genetic differences. E, ocean currents probably carry many of the baby shrimp hatched at a given Indonesian coral reef out into the open ocean rather than to another coral reef. Okay, so the word many here, even though that might be the case, right, that many of the baby shrimp, so a lot of them, just go out into the open ocean, and maybe that means that they get eaten or, you know, something happens to them, but they're not able to interbreed with the others in the coral reef. That doesn't take away from the fact that probably baby shrimp get carried between the different reefs, right? So just because a lot of them just go out into the open ocean doesn't mean that there aren't others that are carried to different reefs, right? So it does say that many do this rather than going to another coral reef, but what we would need would be that like all of them actually just go out into the open ocean. The other issue with E is that if it was suggesting that they're all going to the open ocean instead of between the different reefs, that would actually be attacking a statement that we have to take as true here. It just goes against their evidence here, which is that probably the ocean currents carry the baby shrimp between different reefs. We don't want to do that. We don't want to just be disregarding the statement that's being made here. What we're trying to do is say, even though that's the case, there's still a reason that we're getting these genetic differences and a reason that they haven't interbred and become genetically indistinguishable. So C gives us that reason. Gives us a satisfying explanation for the surprising fact. Okay, let's keep moving. So 18 was the next one I was asked about. This one is a necessary assumption question. We've got the word requires, and it's an assumption question. So the relationship between the correct answer and the conclusion is going to be if we negate the correct answer, the argument is ruined. Okay. So this is the negation test. So we would negate the answer choices and see what impact that has on the argument. And if negating the answer ruins the argument, that means it's the correct answer. Right. So first we got to analyze the argument. So a zoologist says that every domesticated large mammal species now in existence was domesticated thousands of years ago. Since those days, people undoubtedly tried innumerable times to domesticate each of the wild large mammal species that seemed worth domesticating. Clearly, therefore, most wild large mammal species in existence today either would be difficult to domesticate or would not be worth domesticating. All right, so that's our conclusion, right? Most wild large mammal species in existence today either would be difficult to domesticate, right? So that sort of suggests people tried many times and they failed, right? So they were difficult to, or they would not be worth domesticating. Now, this is just a statement of reality, whereas here we do have seemed worth domesticating. So that's people's perception of the value of domesticating that mammal species would have. So I do see a little bit of a gap there potentially, right? Seemed worth domesticating versus whether or not they actually would be. So there's like a state of mind versus just the state of reality kind of gap. But we'll see. We'll see if that comes up. Really, the test is the negation test, right? Okay, so A, in spite of the difficulties encountered, at one time or another, people have tried to domesticate each wild large mammal species. That does not have to be true, because if it weren't true, if people didn't try to domesticate each wild large mammal species, that's still okay, right? The conclusion is about most, and even if they didn't try, it would be okay because there's that part about whether it seemed worthwhile or not, right? So if we negate this, it's not really going to ruin the argument. Also, this is quite a strongly worded statement, right? It talks about something that would apply to each wild large mammal species, so all of them. If we negate this, all we're saying that it's not all. So there's at least one exception. That would not ruin the argument, right? So negating this would just create at least one exception to the statement, and having like one that people haven't tried to isn't going to ruin the argument at all. The conclusion talks about most, so we're not even dealing with all in the conclusion, and it also gives us another reason besides it being difficult, where we just wouldn't have tried at all because it wasn't worthwhile. Okay. A is out. B, it is not much easier today to domesticate wild large mammal species than it was in the past. So what if it was much easier today, right? So what if we negate this and we say it is much easier today than it was in the past? So that's not really relevant, right? We're not talking about whether or not the wild species today could be domesticated today. We're talking about whether or not they, oh, actually, sorry, either would be difficult to domesticate or would not be worth domesticating. Sorry, we are talking about whether or not they would be difficult to domesticate. And we're basing that on people having tried innumerable times. Okay, you know what? I'm going to keep this one because I do think it could really hurt the argument if it were not true. Okay, C. Not all of the large mammal species that were domesticated in the past are still in existence. Yeah, we don't care about that. The ones that have gone extinct, we're not worried about that. The conclusion is about the ones that are in existence today. So I'm going to eliminate C. D, it's the easier it is to domesticate a wild large mammal species, the more worthwhile it is to do so. I don't think that we need those two things to be connected to one another. So if they're not connected to each other, if just because it's easier to domesticate a wild large mammal, it doesn't necessarily mean it's more worthwhile. Like if those factors are not correlated, then it's not really going to matter. So let's say that there are some wild large mammal species that are difficult to domesticate. It's possible to domesticate them, but it's difficult to do so. And yet when you do it, it is worthwhile. Is that going to cause problems for our conclusion that the ones that exist today either would be difficult to domesticate or wouldn't be worth domesticating? No, we can keep those factors separate. E, of all the domesticated large mammal species in existence today, the very first to be domesticated were the easiest to domesticate. So we don't really care about the order in which they were domesticated. If the very first to domesticate were not the easiest, like they could still be the second easiest. Like, and again, it's trying to connect ease of domestication to a sort of like order. It's trying to like correlate it to the timeline. But that's just not going to make a difference whether it's true or not. Whereas B, because we are talking about would be difficult to domesticate, not like they were in the past difficult to domesticate, but would they currently be difficult? Yeah, so I'm going to go with B. And that's the correct answer. So yeah, really important there that I reread the conclusion. And because I had it in my mind that it wouldn't be relevant talking about how easy it is today versus in the past, but rereading the conclusion as I was assessing whether the negation would ruin the argument was the key to actually choosing that one instead of eliminating it. All right, 25. So we have a must be true question. And okay, so we have some statements here, and looks like we've got a mix of conditional reasoning and then also a quantitative statement, right? So most greater than 50%, but then we also have all, which is a conditional indicator word. We have the word if, which is also conditional, and all again. So lots of conditional reasoning, and then we have that one quantitative statement. So first sentence, all coffee houses and restaurants are public places. So if it's a coffee house or it's a restaurant, it's a public place, right? You could also split it up and you could have, if it's a coffee house, it's a public place. If it's a restaurant, it's a public place. Okay. Contrapositive would be if it's not a public place, then it's not a coffee house. If it's not a public place, it's not a restaurant. Up here, if it's not a public place, then it is neither a coffee house nor a restaurant. Right. So you just have like two options there for how you want to state that. Then we have most well-designed public places feature artwork. So I'm just going to do that. And so I could say that there are some places that have artwork, or there's some art in well-designed public places. That's the only like reasonable, rational, sorry, there's some art in well-designed places. There we go. That's the only valid inference that I can make from that most statement. So we're not creating a contrapositive there. It's not a conditional statement. Next one, if a public place is uncomfortable, then it's not well-designed. So if it's well-designed, then a public place will not be uncomfy. So it will be comfortable, right? Okay. Going to just delete this so I have more room. And all comfortable public places. So if a public place is comfy, then it has a spacious interior. If it doesn't have a spacious interior, then it's not comfortable or uncomfy. So I'm going to change this. Instead of not uncomfortable, I'm going to say it is comfortable. Okay. Let's look at these statements and see if any of them must be true, if any of them are valid based on the statements that we've put here. So I'm going to write out these statements in the same format so that we can easily compare them. So any restaurant that has a spacious interior is comfortable. So, okay, if it's a restaurant and it has a spacious interior, then it's okay. So restaurants are public places. Yeah, that's great. So it's a public place. It has a spacious interior. But the issue is that we can't get from having a spacious interior to being comfortable, right? It's only if it's comfortable that we know that it has a spacious interior, right? So a spacious interior is necessary for it to be a comfortable public place, but spacious interior is not sufficient for it to be comfortable, right? So this would be a mix-up. So we're going to eliminate that. And by a mix-up, I mean specifically, it would be a mistaken reversal. So A is out. B, most public places that feature artwork are well designed. This one seems to be a confusion of the words in that middle sentence there, right? So this is not something that we can derive from that most statement in the middle. Yeah, there's some art in well-designed public places, but just because it features art doesn't mean that it's well designed, even most of the time. So we can eliminate B. Most coffee houses that are well designed feature artwork. Okay, so we know that most public places that are well-designed feature artwork, but just because it's a public place doesn't necessarily mean it's a coffee house. So again, we have a mistaken reversal there. Okay. You can also look at it as like these are all of the public places, and within that we have coffee houses, we have restaurants, right? And then what they're saying is that most of the public places, or sorry, most of the well-designed public places feature artwork. So well-designed public places are even a smaller category of this group. And then most of those, so it's possible based on the statements that we have that no coffee houses or restaurants are public places, or sorry, are well-designed public places. Yeah, so because well-designed public places are a smaller category than all public places. So let's keep that in mind, right? So this could be all of the well-designed ones. And then we could have, of course, we would have greater than 50% of this group here. So more than half of this whole thing here. That could be all of the well-designed ones, and it might not include any coffee houses or restaurants. Just because these are all public places doesn't mean that they have to overlap. Kind of a long-winded explanation there. I hope that this little drawing actually helped and didn't hinder. I'm going to go ahead and erase this. Any well-designed coffee house or restaurant has a spacious interior. So, okay, if it's well-designed, then it's comfy. If it's comfy, it has a spacious interior. Yeah. That is going to work, right? Yeah, so it's the contrapositive of this bit plus the original here. And then we're also adding the coffee houses and restaurants, right? So if it's a coffee house or a restaurant, it's a public place. And if a public place is uncomfortable, it's not well designed. Therefore, if it is well designed, it is comfortable. And if it's comfortable, then it has a spacious interior. Okay, if we look at E, it goes from spacious interior to well-designed, but that would assume that we're going from spacious interior to comfy and from comfy to well-designed. And so it would be a mistaken reversal of the final statement and a mistaken negation of the penultimate or second to last statement. So D is correct. Right, and that's those 3 questions. If you have any follow-up questions, please let me know. I'm going to do some questions from the other logical reasoning section as well. So this one would be section 1 if you're dealing with a PDF, and the next one would be section 4, but it's just the first logical reasoning section and the second logical reasoning section in the test.